Okay. This is Marian Patterson. Today is July the 7th, and this is in Lexington, Ohio. Now, what was your life like before the war?
Before the war, grew up in a very small town, knew everyone, and it was a very pleasant experience.
And when the war actually started, what were your thoughts about it?
Well, I was fairly young. I was in high school at that time, and you didn't realize the impact that it would have, except I could see that Dad was apprehensive, having been in World War I.
And after the war, what did you realize the implications, or what were your feelings
Oh,
after the
sure,
war?
because I was in college by that time. So, I knew really what it was all about.
Mm-hmm. And when the soldiers actually came home from the war, what was that like?
Probably the most interesting part was the fellows coming back when I was at Ohio State, because most of the time I was there were hardly any, fellows there. They were all in the service. So it was interesting to see.
Mm-hmm. And how'd your life change because of the war?
Oh, rationing probably was the big thing, because sometimes you'll see things from the past, little mementos, and you realize that sugar was rationed, shoes were rationed, different things. It really wasn't difficult for the people, at home, except that their relatives were going to war.
Mm-hmm. And how did you hear? Like, how did you get your news about the war and how it was going on?
It would be radio at that time, of course, the newspaper.
Okay. And after the war, how do you think the world, and more specifically America, how did it change?
Well, America changed because the fellas came back and just wanted to fit into their old lives and get on with their lives. They didn't want to do anything different. So a lot of them got married, had to have housing. The housing sometimes was very, you would say primitive, but very simple, that they built small houses for the fellows that were coming back to live in.
Okay. And how do you think the war like positively affected or negatively affected the entire world?
Probably trying to, people learned that you could put down these different elements like fascists and Nazis and that sort of thing, but at a great, great cost. And as I get older and look back on it, I have become a pacifist, and I'm so in favor of all the money and the resources going toward peace rather than making war. And I think we have to reach out to, as our best pastor said not long ago, reach out to our enemies and do it far ahead of time when things are really in a crisis.
Do you remember where you were when you heard Pearl Harbor had been bombed?
Yes, we had company. We were at home, and a couple of my aunts had come up for dinner, and we heard it on the radio. Dad had been predicting that we'd go into war because he said you kept hearing the national anthem all the time. He says you can be sure we're going to war.
What was the reaction amongst your group when you heard the news that day on December 7th?
You mean
in your family?
In the family. Very sobering, I would say. It's been a long, long time for me, and I don't remember how they took it, but probably they didn't want to upset my brother and myself too much.
When we actually went to D-Day and the first real big action of the war happened, obviously we went in before D-Day, but when D-Day hit, it started How'd you feel when D-Day happened?
Into D-Day, are you
Yeah.
saying? Well, of course, you realize the consequences that we were going to lose people. And I did know one fellow who was lost that day. He was my friend's brother. She was a friend down in Maryland. And I had known him, and he was killed that day.
How long did it take for word to get back from Europe on injuries or deaths in the war?
I don't really remember about that. How long it would take. Of course, communications were not as effective as they are today. I remember one friend, been friends throughout childhood, and he was shot in the abdomen, and he said that he was in a cave, lying in a cave for 2 days before he got aid. So the medical care was nothing like it is today either.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember where you were when you heard the war had ended?
Let's see, when the Germans gave up, I'm not certain that I remember that. But when the Japanese were defeated, well, a bunch of us were, around town, all gathered like young people do, and we heard there that.
Was there a lot of celebration or just more of a relief that it was over?
Well, there was no celebration then, but I really can't remember, but they obviously had celebrations afterward. Now, being a tiny town, it wasn't like New York where you see that picture of the fella kissing, or the sailor kissing the nurse, and that's a famous picture from the end of the war.
What did you do during the war?
One thing I did to try to help out was took a first aid class. They wanted people to take a first aid class, and didn't do anything very different being in college. I just went ahead with, that was it. If you were living here, you went on with your life as it was.
Was that weird just knowing that right now there's a huge war, but you weren't in any way directly involved with it?
Was that weird?
Yeah.
No, because they didn't ask any more of us than that. We questioned whether rationing and that sort of thing was actually necessary, or whether they just wanted to impress on the population there was a war going on.
What was the reaction of the time when the word of the atomic bombs came back? Was there fear?
People,
Was it?
I think, could not even begin to appreciate what havoc that would wreak. We knew there was something going on down in Tennessee. They were building something that was super secret, but you realized that the Japanese were going to give up. They couldn't go on at that rate.
Mm-hmm.